Throughout Joseph Stalin's time as leader of the Soviet Union, scores of his population and people would be executed by the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. The word purge is synonymous with the Soviet leader, and one of the largest onslaughts was the Great Purge. With this, between 700,000 and 1 million people who were suspected of harbouring dissenting thoughts and words against Stalin were executed or were sent to concentration camps known as Gulags. Stalin knew how to enforce his power and to strike fear into the hearts of the people, but he would also turn on his closest friends and allies when he wanted to. One man who was turned on was the man who was actually in charge of the NKVD and much of the Great Purge, and he would not be exempt from the brutal wrath of Stalin. Nikolai Yezhov was the man who organised the mass killings and arrests and also torture of people, but he would be erased from history by Stalin, and he was also killed. Join us today as we look at the horrific execution of Nikolai Yezhov, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Nikolai Yezhov was born on the 1st of May 1895. He would later claim he was a member of the proletariat, however he was actually from a rather affluent Russian peasant family. His father had a number of different jobs, and he at one point ran a brothel, which brought extra income for the Yezhovs. But after his schooling had finished, Nikolai worked as an assistant to a tailor, and he then joined the Imperial Russian Army. However, in 1917 he joined the Bolsheviks a few months before the October Revolution broke out, and he fought for the Red Army during the Russian Civil War. Inside of the military he continued to rise through the ranks, but he also then became involved in local and regional politics. He was also involved in the local committees of the Communist Party, and he then became a secretary before working in the accountancy department of the party. He was skilled in this role, and he became the head of the department, before he was then made the Deputy People's Commissar of Agriculture. It was clear that Nikolai was a devoted communist, and he continued to rise through the different positions, before he was elected to the Central Committee, before he became the secretary. However, in 1934, the Bolshevik chief of Leningrad, Sergei Kirov, was murdered, and after this Stalin then used this incident as a way to issue purges of his population, and to rid the land of anyone who dared to cast doubt about him. Stalin viewed Nikolai Yezhov as someone who could ruthlessly carry out the bloody purges. He began to point his finger at the others for dissent, and he justified the purges, and he became the head of the NKVD. These were the executioners who carried out the purges, and Yezhov was also the People's Commissar for International Affairs, and he was an ardent supporter of Stalin. He was happy to reduce the political power of his opponents through purges and accusation, but the first job he had as the head of the NKVD was to deal and investigate the former fallen head of the NKVD, Henryk Yagoda. Yezhov ordered a show trial, and he bugged out Yagoda's office, and he was accused of being a spy for the Germans. The trial heard how Yagoda had allegedly tried to poison Stalin and Yezhov to try and take the top job himself, and to bring capitalism to the Soviet Union. It was Yezhov himself who tortured Yagoda to try and get him to confess to crimes, but Yagoda would be sentenced to death after Yezhov ordered his execution. But then further purges were carried out across the Soviet Union to attack anyone who dared to dissent against Stalin. This took place during 1937 and 1938. The NKVD, led by Yezhov, attacked huge sections of the Soviet population. Anyone who could be accused of dissenting was likely shot by a firing squad quickly, with very few questions asked. Many politicians at this time feared the knock on the door from the NKVD, and Yezhov became incredibly feared at this time, and many of his opponents were greatly intimidated by his power. He also sent many people to the Gulags, the concentration camps established inside the Soviet Union. Also, during the Great Purge, around half of the Soviet government officials and officers were stripped of their ranks and were imprisoned. But scores were executed quickly, and this destabilised the Soviet population, and ordinary people found themselves accused wrongly of being disloyal to Stalin's government, and then they faced brutal interrogation and torture. Many also lost their jobs, and some were of course falsely accused, and Yezhov would later say, "There will be some innocent victims in this fight against fascist agents. We are launching a major attack on the enemy. Let there be no resentment if we bump someone with an elbow. Better than 10 innocent people should suffer than one spy get away. When you chop wood, chips fly." With this he was saying that innocent people would suffer for him to successfully purge the population, and that it was justified that innocent people would go to their deaths for the greater good of the Soviet Union. Over 1 million people were arrested and around 700,000 were shot after being accused of treason and crimes against the Soviet state. Whilst he was in power as the chief of the NKVD, the populations of the Gulag systems also grew massively, and around 140,000 people would die inside of these camps from a lack of food, exhaustion, and the way they were treated. Yezhov, though, was almost as powerful and as feared as Stalin, and this was very dangerous for him. Because of this, he also found himself purged and executed. Throughout his time in power, he had exterminated the old Bolsheviks and other parts of society which were considered unruly, as the Second World War was about to break out. However, Yezhov was being used by Stalin, and when he was deemed to have done his job, he cast him aside. Stalin at this time favoured Lavrentiy Beria, and he was appointed Yezhov's deputy, but it would be Beria's job to deal with his boss. Yezhov had ordered Beria's arrest during the Great Purge, but Stalin spared him, and he referred to Beria as his Himmler, praising his efficiency. But then Beria would become the new chief of the NKVD, and Yezhov was ousted from power. He knew that he would be executed, and he became a drunk, and in his final days he was predictably criticised publicly by Stalin. Stalin gave reasons for Yezhov's removal from power, and many of his agents went into hiding to save their lives. Nikolai Yezhov then informed his wife he wanted a divorce, and he was then officially sacked from the NKVD on the 25th of November 1938, with Beria succeeding him in ultimate power. Stalin did not know what to do with Yezhov to begin with, but then Beria spoke out against him at the annual conference of the Supreme Soviet. The following year he was arrested and was taken to prison. His arrest was done in complete secrecy, and was done away from the eyes of the public, and it was also kept quiet from the NKVD, as Beria worried that some of his officers may have been loyal to him. Nikolai Yezhov was brought in for interrogation, and he was tortured, and he then admitted to having been an enemy of the people. He was a man who had been part of thousands of these interrogations, and he knew he would soon be executed. He claimed that he had stolen government money, and that he had collaborated with the Gestapo, and he also admitted he was incompetent at his job. Then a closed trial happened, and at this he claimed his love for Stalin, and claimed he had been tortured to admit these charges that he was being found guilty of. He said when he would die, his final words he would utter would be Stalin's name, but he knew what was coming his way. He was taken out of the courtroom briefly for 30 minutes, and then a guilty verdict and death sentence was passed, and for this once powerful chief of Stalin's secret police, he was dragged out of the courtrooms kicking and screaming. He wept for his life, but days after he was condemned to die, he would be executed. Yezhov was moved to a basement room inside a small NKVD station in Moscow. It's likely Yezhov may have even designed his own execution chamber during his time in power, and it had been purpose-built. The room had a sloped floor that would allow blood to trickle down to a drain, and it had been built in a way to make it easy to clean up after executions. These chambers were made to make sure that the Great Purge was carried out effectively and efficiently, but Yezhov's execution occurred in complete secrecy. He was lined up in a small room, and then an executioner stood behind him with his weapon ready. It's believed that the executioner was either infamous executioner Vasily Blokhin or the future KGB chairman. However, Yezhov with a bullet to the brain was executed quickly, and the chamber was then cleaned down before his body was then dragged out of the building and was swiftly cremated. His execution remained a secret for many years, and most Soviets believed he'd been sent to an asylum for his alcoholism. But Nikolai Yezhov was a brutal and ruthless chief of Stalin's NKVD, who was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands. He oversaw the Great Purge, but he would later become known as the Vanishing Commissar, as Stalin ordered press photographs of him to be altered so that he was not shown in them. He was turned on by Stalin, and his execution was in line with thousands that his death squads oversaw, and it was planned by Stalin and Lavrentiy Beria, who both wanted him dead. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.